Animal Crossing Wild World is the worst game in the series, and I have the science to back that claim up. This all started when I made my first Wild World town in an attempt to understand why people love this game so much, and ultimately ended in me going down a rabbit hole of human psychology, the science of game presentation, and how those fields overlap to create positive feedback loops in players. Let me explain how I got there. You see, despite me adoring the Animal Crossing series, I've actually never played two of its most beloved games, Wild World and City Folk. I decided it was time for me to fix that, so I grabbed my DS and my copy of Wild World, and I wasted no time in making a new town. I was really excited to give this game a go. I've spent so much time in New Leaf and New Horizons, so I was really intrigued by the idea of something entirely new, and what I found was not at all what I expected. As the days went on and I started to fall into the rhythm and routine of this game, it didn't take me long to realize I wasn't having fun with this game. I played on this save every day for 2 weeks straight, and the game just didn't click with me. I couldn't escape the feeling that this game was inadequate in some way. I couldn't help but find myself bored in a matter of minutes when I'd previously been able to sink untold hundreds of hours into this series. But more than anything, I couldn't stop thinking about why? Why was I not enjoying this game? Why was it leaving me so underwhelmed? And with these questions in mind, I did what I do best. I started analysing this game's mechanics. At its core, Animal Crossing Wild World is mechanically very similar to the Animal Crossing games I'm already familiar with. The overarching goals of the game are to pay off your outstanding debts with Tom Nook, and make the town and your home your own. And I realised that this was the primary issue I was facing when it came to my enjoyment of this game. I lacked the motivation to work towards these goals. We saw how excited I got when I made my first payment, so this clearly wasn't an issue with the Animal Crossing formula. Something specific changed for me throughout the course of my time with this game that killed my motivation. With this in mind, I started working backwards to determine the root cause of this issue. My lack of motivation to pay off my loans told me that there was something I didn't like about making money, so I broke down the primary ways in which I could go about doing that in this game. Because I was mostly in the earlier stages of the game and was playing in the winter months, fossils and bugs were not reliable sources of income, which left me with selling fruit, shells, and fish. Shells and fruit were very easy to sell, but the issue with that is there's a cap on how much you can make from these things a day. It's not a hard limit, but there are only so many of these things to actually collect and sell in a day, which leaves fishing as the main method by which I could make money, and I hate fishing in this game. So let's unravel this. Why do I hate fishing in this game? I always found it to be so frustrating. The clunky controls made it so difficult to get myself properly aligned, so I missed like 9 out of 10 throws, and then when I actually did manage to catch the attention of a fish, I really struggled to actually reel it in. See, the sound cues in this game are very different than what I'm used to, and honestly, really aren't very helpful. So I found myself predominantly using visual cues to tell when I needed to start reeling my line in, but I could never actually tell whether I had a bite or not because of how chunky and pixelated the graphics are. And then, all at once, it hit me. Suddenly, everything became clear. The one thing that consistently stood out to me, the one thing that was constantly dampening my experience with this game, the reason I didn't enjoy Animal Crossing Wild World, was its graphics. It all made sense. But surely, I thought to myself, that wasn't enough for me to dislike this game, or any game for that matter. Was this just a convenient excuse to mask the fact that I couldn't master a simple mechanic, or was there something deeper to this? This question led me to a paper titled Game Graphics, Emotions, and Player Performance by Katrina Johansson and Mia Roberts. According to the abstract, this paper covers the correlation between emotions, game graphics, and their effect on player performance in competitive video games. This was immediately intriguing to me. Obviously, fishing in Animal Crossing is far from an esport, but the emotional side of the paper's focus seemed like it could yield some applicable results. Joe has a new game, you should buy it, or at least back it on Backerkit. Agents of Fate Reloaded is a revamped deluxe version of Agents of Fate, a high-octane action role-playing party game made by my good friend JoeFredrick. This game sees players pit against each other in action movie situations, competing to see who can complete their mission first. Players can choose from super spies, vigilantes, hired muscle, unsuspecting bystanders, and more, in an improvised dance of martial arts and social deduction. Your chances of completing your mission hinge on your ability to outplan, outmaneuver, and out-improvise the other players at the table. With an emphasis on action and comedy, Agents of Fate is the perfect addition to your tabletop game collection. And with all of the new content and missions included in this new Reloaded edition, your next games night would be incomplete without it. Visit the links in the description to find out more. Thank you so much for that song, Hippie Dog, that was great. The experiment conducted in this paper played out as follows. A competitive fighting game was created and included 3 stages, each one being of varied levels of graphical fidelity. 10 participants, aged between 20 and 30, went head-to-head on all 3 stages, and then were asked a series of questions about their experience. And the results from this experiment were absolutely fascinating. While the researchers found no statistically significant correlation between graphics and competitive performance, there was a notable link between graphics and player emotions. Almost all of the participants of this study reported the higher level of graphical fidelity led to them becoming more immersed and invested in the game. Both participants 3 and 8 were quoted as saying, "Higher quality graphics help with immersion." A lot of the players also claimed the better graphics made the game more enjoyable, with participants 1, 6, and 7 even going as far as saying bad graphics made the game boring. Quote again, "If there are not good graphics, then the game gets boring." Participant 8 made a fascinating comparison between games that focused on narratives and games that focus more on building, like The Sims. Quote, "If a game has a great story, you do not need to focus on the graphics as much. But if it's an exploring game where you build and stuff, you would want good graphics." This is of particular interest to me because I feel that Animal Crossing fits very naturally into this comparison. The goal of the game is to build a life and a town, and with the exception of the interactions you have with the characters who populate your game's world, there is no narrative to latch onto. Speaking anecdotally, I've found that when I'm not immersed in a game, I find it much more difficult to enjoy. It's one of my biggest issues with the modern Paper Mario trilogy, in fact. And when you combine this with the consensus that bad graphics lead to less immersion, I'd be willing to extrapolate that there is indeed a correlation between bad graphics and limited enjoyability. This was a mind-blowing conclusion to reach. The results of this paper and the sentiments shared by the study's participants articulated my exact feelings towards Animal Crossing Wild World. It explained exactly why I was not having as much fun with the game as I felt like I should have been having. And it gave me the unparalleled catharsis of knowing that what I once thought was a childish, shallow excuse to dislike a game is actually scientifically justified. Now, were there flaws in the paper's methodology? Sure. Perhaps the sample size could have been bigger, perhaps the age demographic chosen have a natural bias against lower graphical quality due to the games they grew up with, and there's an argument to be made about the repeatability of this study. But regardless of all of that, this paper at least gave us a fascinating discussion piece. I'll leave a link to the full paper in the description. I highly recommend giving it a read. So, what can we learn from this game? Now that we know there is evidence backing up my negative feelings towards Animal Crossing Wild World, what can the game teach us about games development? Well, for starters, make sure your game has good graphics. To be clear, I'm not saying every game has to have hyper-realistic textures and ray tracing. Good graphics is ultimately a subjective term, and the spectrum of art styles is so broad that there is no objective standard for what looks good in a game. game. However, regardless of the art style, you have to ensure graphical cohesion and clarity. If your game is 3D and cartoony, fantastic! Just make sure that what is being shown to the player is clear and easily distinguishable. Make sure that it's not just a bulky mass of pixels. Lesson 2, never underestimate immersion. Even if your game is the prettiest game in the world, you have to make sure your players feel connected to the world and events of the game in order for them to be consistently engaged. This is something Wild World would have achieved remarkably were it not for the abysmal graphics. I was so caught up in the villagers' drama and the stakes of trying to pay off my debt before the shop closed for a day. The game offered micro doses of immersion despite the graphical shortcomings. So balancing the two is a recipe for a great player experience. Lesson 3, don't make me fish if your fishing mechanics are shit! Having terrible graphics is just one way to guarantee that your game is ruined. If you're interested in learning about what else ruins a game, you'll love my last video on New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe.